Are the Seattle Seahawks quietly preparing to move on from Drew Lock despite being fresh off a championship season? Recent reports suggest Lock's future in Seattle is uncertain as the team evaluates its quarterback depth behind starter Sam Darnold. With Lock entering the final year of his deal and limited playing time as a backup, some believe the Seahawks could explore a trade or release to free up roster space. On the other hand, others argue his experience and reliability still make him a valuable insurance option for a team with Super Bowl ambitions. Either way, the situation is developing, and a decision on Lock could signal bigger moves coming for Seattle's offense. All right, so today we've got some really interesting and honestly surprising developments coming out of Seattle. And if you're a fan of the Seattle Seahawks, you're going to want to pay very close attention to this because it looks like the team could be heading toward a pretty significant decision at the quarterback position, specifically involving Drew Lock. Now, for a lot of fans, Drew Lock has kind of been one of those players who's always sitting right on the edge of something bigger, right? Like, you see the arm talent, you see flashes of confidence, you see moments where he looks like he could be a legit starter in this league. But at the same time, consistency has always been the big question mark. And that's exactly why what we're hearing right now is so important. Because according to multiple reports and growing speculation around the league, the Seahawks are seriously evaluating their quarterback room heading into the upcoming season, and there's a real possibility that Drew Lock might not be part of their long-term plans. And when you think about how we got here, it actually makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, it still feels like a big moment for this franchise. Let's rewind just a little bit, because Drew Lock originally came into Seattle after being traded from the Denver Broncos. And at the time, he was seen as a bit of a wild card piece in that blockbuster deal that sent Russell Wilson to Denver. Most people thought Lock might just be a temporary option, maybe even just a backup. But over time, he actually managed to carve out a role for himself, especially as a reliable number 2 behind Geno Smith. And to be fair to Lock, whenever he's been given opportunities, he hasn't been terrible. In fact, there have been moments where he stepped in and kept the offense moving, showed good command, and even gave the team a spark. But here's the thing. In today's NFL, being not terrible isn't enough, especially at quarterback. And especially for a team like Seattle that's trying to stay competitive in a tough division. The NFL is all about upside. It's about long-term potential. And it's about finding that guy who can elevate your entire roster. And right now, it feels like the Seahawks front office is asking themselves a very tough question. Is Drew Lock that guy, or is it time to move on and invest in something new? And from what we're hearing, they might already have their answer. One of the biggest factors here is the direction of the team overall. Because the Seahawks aren't in full rebuild mode, they're kind of in that middle ground where they have talent, they have pieces, and they believe they can compete. But they also know they need to keep building for the future. And quarterback is obviously the most important position in all of sports, so any decision there carries massive weight. There's also the financial side of things, which a lot of fans don't always think about, but it's huge. Keeping a backup quarterback like Drew Lock isn't just about performance, it's about value, cap space, and flexibility. If the team feels like they can get similar or better production from a younger or cheaper option, or maybe even draft someone with upside, then suddenly keeping Lock becomes a lot less appealing. And speaking of the draft, that's another major layer to this story, because this upcoming draft class is expected to have some intriguing quarterback prospects. Not necessarily all first-round superstars, but definitely players who could develop into solid starters or high-quality backups. So the Seahawks could be looking at this as an opportunity to reset that position behind Geno Smith and potentially find someone who fits their system even better. Now let's talk about Geno for a second, because his presence is a big reason why this situation is unfolding the way it is. Geno Smith has really revitalized his career in Seattle, and he's proven that he can lead this offense. He's accurate, he's composed, and he's earned the trust of the coaching staff. So, as long as Geno is the starter, the Seahawks don't necessarily need Drew Lock to be anything more than a backup. And if they're not fully confident in him even in that role, then it opens the door for change. And here's where things get even more interesting. Because if the Seahawks do decide to move on from Drew Lock, it doesn't necessarily mean he's done in the NFL. Not even close. There are always teams looking for quarterbacks with experience and arm talent, and Lock definitely has both. In the right situation, with the right coaching, he could still find a chance to compete for a starting job or at least be a strong backup option somewhere else. So this isn't just a Seattle story. It could become a league-wide storyline depending on how things play out. But from the Seahawks' perspective, this is about making a decision that aligns with their long-term vision. And that's something head coach Pete Carroll has always emphasized during his time with the team. Carroll has built a culture around competition, around constantly pushing players to earn their roles, and around not being afraid to make tough calls if it benefits the team. So if the coaching staff and front office feel like moving on from Drew Lock is the right move, they're not going to hesitate just because of familiarity or past contributions. And let's be real, NFL teams make these kinds of decisions all the time. It's part of the business. Even players with potential can find themselves on the outside looking in if the team sees a better path forward. Another thing to keep an eye on here is how this decision could impact the locker room, because quarterbacks aren't just players. They're leaders, they're voices, and they're part of the team's identity. If Drew Lock is well-liked in that locker room, which by most accounts he is, then moving on from him could have some ripple effects. But at the same time, winning tends to smooth over everything, and if the Seahawks believe this move makes them better, that's what they're going to prioritize. So where does this leave us right now? As of this moment, nothing is officially confirmed, but the momentum is definitely building toward a potential split between Drew Lock and the Seahawks. It's one of those situations where you can kind of feel the shift happening, even before the final decision is announced. And for fans, it creates a mix of emotions, because on one hand, you understand the logic, you understand the need to keep evolving, but on the other hand, you've seen what Drew Lock can do, and you wonder if maybe there was still something there that hadn't fully been unlocked yet. That's the tricky part with players like him. The potential always keeps the door open just a little bit. But in the NFL, timing is everything. And sometimes teams decide they can't wait any longer to see if that potential turns into consistent production. So as we move closer to the next phase of the offseason, whether that's the draft, free agency moves, or training camp, this is definitely a storyline you're going to want to keep your eyes on. Because if the Seahawks do make this move, it could signal a lot more about their plans than just one roster decision. It could tell us how they view their quarterback future, how aggressive they want to be in building the roster, and how close they believe they are to truly contending again. And for Drew Lock, it could mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that might give him another shot to prove himself, maybe in a different system, maybe with a fresh start. So let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think the Seahawks should move on from Drew Lock? Or do you believe he still deserves a bigger opportunity in Seattle? Because this is one of those decisions that could look very different depending on how things play out down the line. And as always, stay tuned, because as soon as we get more updates on this situation, you already know we're going to break it all down right here.